Hey everybody, it is a nice spring day, and what spring means for the Miata is it's safety and emissions check time. So this month I need to get it done, and last year all the emissions passed, no problem. I'm in a location that tests emissions. Now this is a 94, so it's an ODB1 vehicle. So they don't test it by just looking at the computer. They actually do a sniffer test. So they hook it up on a dyno and do a rolling test. And last year it just barely passed on the first try. The NOx was a little high. And when I bought the car, it was straight piped, so it didn't have a catalytic converter. So there was no way it was going to pass. The EGR was not hooked up. And I added this to these custom headers. And yes, that is a gas line for like a dryer, and it's made of steel and it works just fine. I had some cracking because the headers are just brittle at this point, and so I put a little exhaust cement on there to seal that up, just a little exhaust leak, so no big deal. And then I used the existing pipe, which I cut off and connected with some compression fittings. Just brass, that it held the heat just fine. And so that's how I got my EGR working again. So the EGR with the cat and everything, it passed without too much difficulty, like I said the first time. So what are some tips for getting your ODB1 vehicle to pass emissions? Now, in my state, this is the last year for me, because this car is about to turn 25 years old. So that means it'll be exempt, which is fantastic. But I still have this year to go. And so I thought I'd cover a few of the main things that you want to do to your vehicle to make sure that it can pass everything, and like what causes what. So there's really kind of three main things that cause emissions to be higher than normal in a vehicle. And that is, it can be running in a rich condition, it can be running in a lean condition, or you could be having a situation where your temperatures are too high. And so if you're running too rich, then your hydrocarbon levels are going to be high because there's unburnt gas going through. If it's too lean, then your temperatures will be high, and you'll probably have high NOx, maybe carbon monoxide. And then finally, if you have another reason for high temperatures, for example, you've got a lot of carbon buildup and it's causing it's to the point where you've got higher compression because of that extra carbon in there and the pistons and all that. And also carbon in general in there can retain heat and will cause higher piston temperature. So that can cause NOx to form. And so you get a higher NOx content. Now, of course, your catalytic converter, if it's not working or it's blown out or whatever, just not present, then that'll obviously contribute to higher NOx values. So, but the main things that you want to check are, basic everyday maintenance things are the first things. And so you want to check your air filter. You want to check your MAF sensor and clean that off with some MAF cleaner. You may want to clean your throttle body. Make sure that that's not staying slightly open and letting air into it, which will contribute to a lean problem. And then also general maintenance, check your spark plugs, replace those, replace your wires. If you don't have proper spark on all the cylinders, then you're not going to be getting a complete burn, and you'll be running rich. That's what will be coming out the tailpipe. Now, the other thing you want to do is look for any kind of vacuum leaks. Now, I have a vacuum gauge that I added in here, and I can tell immediately if I have any vacuum leaks, so I don't. But one way you can tell if you don't have a gauge is, number one, you'll be having a rough idle. Your idle's kind of crappy, or just in general it'll be running a little rough. But if you spray something flammable, and you can even use gas like propane or something like that around the area where your vacuum lines are, the intake plenum here, if you while at idle, if you notice the revs increasing when you spray in a certain area, that means it's sucking that flammable material in and giving a little increase to the richness, and to compensate, the ECU is increasing your revs. So your RPMs will go up. That means you have a vacuum leak, and you can narrow it down to where it is, basically on the plenum, or which hose it is, and replace that hose. So that's another big tell. You can also check for spark to make sure your igniters are okay, your coils are okay, coil pack at the back, or if you have a first gen like a 90 through 93 NA, you're going to have an igniter pack. So those are some of the main things to check for that are super easy. Another thing they're going to be checking is your gas cap. So you'll want to make sure that that seals properly, and you can just test that by undoing your gas cap and listening for the hiss. If there is no hiss, then it's probably not sealing. You can keep your existing gas cap and like put a little dielectric grease on the O-ring that's in there, you know, just to make it pass. You can spray a little WD-40 on it, you know, something like that, or you can just replace it. It generally costs about, you know, $7 to $10 to get a new gas cap. Now the other thing that can make things run lean is if your fuel pressure is not high enough, and that can cause rough conditions, you know, or if your fuel pressure regulator's not working correctly, it could be a rich condition. And so in both of those cases, you'll typically get some rough running, and those are just some things to look out for. So after you've cleaned everything, replaced spark plugs, possibly replaced wires, checked everything out, another good thing to do immediately before the test is to just give yourself an oil change. That means that if you have blow-by, which all cars do, they'll have some amount of blow-by. When that oil gets burnt, it will not contain excess carbon. It'll contain the clean oil level of carbon, which is not that bad. And so it'll reduce hydrocarbons slightly if your oil is brand new. So that's another little thing you can do. If you come back and you have a high NOx, then that means your temperatures are probably high, because they have to be 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit to produce NOx in the first place. And one thing you can do is that even though this, for example, is a car that takes regular unleaded, you can run premium for a tank, and it will increase the octane, and which actually cools the combustion temps. So that can help with the NOx. Now, that's probably not enough if your catalytic converter is completely blown, so you may need to replace that. But that's you know, that's something you can try. They also have fuel additives that you can dump in, or something like that increases the octane, but it basically does the same thing as running a like premium gas. Now, also, if you have a high NOx reading, your EGR system may not be working correctly. If you don't have one, which is I think the case with 90 through 93 Miatas, then that's not an option. You can't really do much about it, but I think they have a higher baseline anyway, so the test takes that into account based on your car and your year. But if you do have an EGR problem, one easy thing you can do is pop it off. It's in the back, and give it a good cleaning. And you can take some, you know, carb cleaner or something like that, and clean it out. And sometimes those things are just gunked up, and so they're not working effectively. Now my car had actually passed. A final thing to mention is it actually passed with incorrect timing. Now the timing was correct as far as when you use the timing light. I don't know if we have enough light right at the moment to see that. I don't think we do. But with the timing light, it was fine. I adjusted it. Actually, it was overly advanced, and I adjusted it back to stock, which is 10 degrees advanced. And it was running like at 18 or some kind of crap. And when I got it, and I adjusted it back to 10. You can even retard it slightly, which can help with certain emissions. But the thing that was off on my car, and it still passed, was the timing belt was off by a notch on one of the cams. And I want to say it was the intake cam. And when it's off by a notch, depending on the direction it's off and which cam it's off, it can do different things. Starting with will not start, to idles like crap, to high power, like high RPM power loss. And I was getting that third one. So basically it started, idled okay, ran okay. It's just that high RPMs, it just didn't do anything. You know, you could barely, you know, you took it out on the highway and it was like nothing. I mean, you could get it up to speed and everything, but it was wrong. So I didn't know if that was my car or not until I took it apart, and then because I hadn't really driven Miatas before, so I wasn't really sure what the norm was. But after I took it apart and noticed that the thing was off, I checked it like 5 times. I was like, really? Yep, it's off. Okay. And I fixed it. Then all of a sudden it had new life. The car was suddenly amazingly peppy compared to what it was. So imagine that. You fix the timing on the car and it's going to run well. But it still passed even with that. So I don't have too much nervousness about making it past this time. I'm going to do some of the same things. I don't drive the car a huge amount, so everything is still new on it that I replaced last year. I'm going to inspect the spark plugs, take a look at that. I may just replace them just because, what do they cost, like $8 or $10, you know, whatever, for a set of 4. Replace those. The air filter should be fine. I replaced the fuel filter before. You know, so those are some of the main things to check. Now, the last thing I mentioned is, you know, change the oil right before. You could try running premium, but the last thing is, if you have had NOx problems in the past, you definitely want to get your catalytic converter up to temp. And so that means running the car for a good 20 minutes at least before you get there and get it tested. And hopefully you go on a time of day where it's not going to be super busy at the place. Try to find a place that's not super busy, and then run it and then have them tested immediately. So if you can do that, then it'll keep the temp up in the catalytic converter. Your cat will be working as best that it can, and it'll keep those numbers down, and hopefully it'll pass. So that's pretty much it. Just wanted to cover these different tips, tricks, whatever you call it. I mean, everything's perfectly legal. It's just, you know, basic maintenance, really. But these are things that you want to really think about right before you take your car to get it tested on a sniffer, especially a dyno type style thing, where it's going to be running, you know, under load with the wheels rolling and all that kind of stuff. So hope this is helpful, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.